So we begin. Let us begin our learning. Okay, we are beginning. Today's daf is daf Chof Tes, and we will begin Chof Ches 28, and we will begin from Chof Zayin Omud Sheni, about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines from the bottom, with the Gemara that begins Tanu Rabbanan. We learned yesterday that Rabbi Eliezer was of the opinion that you're supposed to stay in one sukkah for 7 days. That's it. The whole sukkahs, you have to be in one sukkah. You can't switch around. So the Gemara brings a story. Tanu Rabbanan, Masab Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer, there's a story about Rabbi Eliezer. Sheshavas beglil ha'elyon. He took residence in the upper Galilee. B'sukkasei shel Yochanan b'Rabbi Eloi, in the sukkah belonging to Rabbi Yochanan bar the son of Rabbi Eloi. B'Kesaria, in Kesaria, v'Amillah, and others say B'Kesarian, in a place called Kesarian. In other words, in the middle of Yom Tiv, he went to visit his rabbi. His rabbi was Yochanan b'Rabbi Eloi. So Rabbi Eliezer went to visit him and stayed in his sukkah. V'Hegia chama l'sukkah. And the Gemara says, and this is very fascinating, because it's very important, lahalacha, according to some opinions. The sun came into the sukkah. It's a Middle Eastern climate, right? So the sun is getting very hot. Amoloi, so Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Eloi asked, Mahu she'efrosh oleho sadin. Can I put a sheet on my schach, like a dark sheet on the schach, to prevent the sun from coming in? Now, you're going to look at this like wondering, well, how could you put a dark sheet on the schach? That will become like the sukkah would become possible. The answer is no, it wouldn't, because if you put a covering on your schach, that covering becomes comes nullified into the schach. It's as if it doesn't exist. You're still yaitze, like sitting in the sukkah. And that's as long as it doesn't form an oihel, another tent underneath, like underneath the bed, you don't necessarily have to be under the schach per se. A person could be in a sukkah, in a sleeping bag, and totally closed, and still be yaitze the mitzvah of sukkah, and vice versa. If you put something on the schach, let's say to catch insects that were falling in off the schach, that's also okay, according to the way Tosfos learns. According to this is very important, because we learned a Mishnah that says you're not allowed to put a sheet over a schach. And that Tosfos explains that was because you're using the sheet as most of your schach. But if you have kosher schach and you're putting a sheet, let's say a dark colored plastic, to protect yourself from the ultraviolet rays of the sun, that would be permitted. So the question Rabbi Eliezer then asked, they asked Rabbi Eliezer, can we put up this sheet? Because putting up a sheet is like making a little oihel. Is like making a temporary oihel, and therefore you're not allowed to build on Yom Tov or Shabbos. Mi also mishum oil arai b'Shabbos eloi. Adding, like building a little bit, is that considered building, and you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos and Yom Tov? So Rabbi Eliezer should have answered the question, and the Gemara says he did not answer the question because Rabbi Eliezer never repeated a psak halacha if he didn't hear it from his rabbi. So he diverted the question and said another something irrelevant. He said there's no Jewish shavit from the Jewish people of the 12 tribes that they didn't have from him a shayfit. In other words, there was shayftim, there were judges. Every shavit had a judge, and Rashi gives you the cheshbon over there, and he goes through like we know Shimshon was from Dan, Ehud from Binyamin, Yeshua was from Ephraim. Those judges, every shavit had a chance to set up one person to be the judge. Okay, that was not relevant to the question. He was just answered something, not the question. Fine. Higia chama lechatzi sukkah. The chama was halfway almost to the sukkah, and it was going to reach, let's say, midday. Amar loy, so they asked him again, Mahu she'efresh aleha sadin. Can't we put a sheet up there to protect us from the sun? Amar loy, they said to him, Ein l'chol kol shavit v'shavit Yisrael shliyatzim memenu neviim. Every shavit had a navi. That's the truth. Every Shevet had their own Navi. Shmuel, as you know, was a Levi. Elisha was a Kohen. Eliyahu was a Kohen. So every Shevet had a Navi. And Shevet Yehuda Binyamin, even though in Shevet Yehuda and Binyamin did not have Nevi'im, Hamidu Malachim al pi Nevi'im. They had kings. Shaul Melech came from Shevet Binyamin. David Melech and Shlomo came from Shevet Yehuda. So every Shevet has an opportunity to be the leader. Again, now the sun is already in the sukkah, heating up the feet of Rabbi Eliezer. So without asking any questions, Notel Yochanan Sodin, Yochanan picked up a sheet, Mufiris Aleh, and put it over the schach, and that was that. So now to protect that the sunlight should not heat up Rabbi Eliezer, and that's it. So when Rabbi Eliezer saw that, Hifshul Rabbi Eliezer Talisay Lechayra V'Yotza. Rabbi Eliezer folded up his marbles, so to speak, or his clothing. He got his coat or whatever it was, and he left the sukkah. The Gemara explains, not Rabbi Eliezer did not want to answer the question. We had this before, I think, somewhere in some of our learning in Yuma, okay, that he never said something that he never heard from his Rebbe. So he didn't want to answer the question. So that ends the whole story. So the Gemara's first question is, how would Rabbi Eliezer come to visit Rabbi Yochanan in the middle of Sukkot? You're not supposed to leave your sukkah for 7 days. Rabbi Eliezer says, you're not allowed to go from one sukkah to another sukkah. You have to stay the same sukkah all 7 days. You have to be in one sukkah. That was his opinion. So the Gemara answers, Regel Acher Havoy. This wasn't Sukkot. This actually was another Yontif. It was maybe Shavuos time. And they had a sukkah there. Had nothing to do with Sukkot. So Rabbi Eliezer was visiting so he went to, let's say, Shavuos time. They happened to be sitting in a hut, a sukkah. So Rabbi Eliezer says, but then Rabbi Eliezer said that he loves lazy people that never leave their house on Yontif. They stay home. So how could Rabbi Eliezer go visit somebody on Yontif and spend Yontif with that person? And for the Gemara, okay, the Gemara says Shabbos Havoy. It was Shabbos. So again, the real story was that on Shabbos, they had like a hut. They call it a sukkah. And the sun was rising. And Rabbi Eliezer did not want to answer the question of whether you can put a sheet on the schach. And therefore, since he didn't answer the question, they did it anyway. And Rabbi Eliezer left that hut and left the sukkah. But it was a Shabbos. So
if it wasn't sukkahs, why would they even ask that question?
That's the point. Because you're not allowed to build on Shabbos.
It's the building part.
It's the building. It's this
right.
thing.
It's the building. You did say that, right.
Remember this picture. Right. We're going to just learn it right now. And if you have like the Flintstone window, you're not allowed to stuff it up. So the Gemara says, why did they have to ask Rabbi Eliezer? Everybody knows the open opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Right. Why did he even ask him? Learn Mishnayos. You see, Rabbi Eliezer said that. You have that open window, and you want to close it up with a board. Rabbi Eliezer says, if it's hanging from the window, that means it never separate from the wall. You can close up the hole because that's not called moisif al binyan. But if it's not, if it's just like separately hanging on the floor, you see this one, it's just hanging on the floor, or even if it's schlepping on the floor, then you're not allowed to do it. That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. The Chacham says you could always close it. Doesn't matter. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, you wouldn't be allowed to put that sheet up because Rabbi Eliezer opinion is that you're not allowed to build a temporary oil on Shabbos. So certainly you're not allowed to put the sheet up on to protect yourself from the sun on that. So the Gemara says you didn't have to. The difference is Hasam hu de mavatel. Over there by the pekak, by the window closure, that the reason why it's considered as if you're building something is because you're leaving it there to close the window. So that's why it's called moisif al habinyan. You're adding to the binyan because you want it to be there to become part of the wall. This sheet, the loy mevatel, you don't plan to leave it there on the schach because after the sun goes away, you're going to take off that plastic or whatever it was, that covering, to get more air into the sukkah. Loy, maybe that would not be called building on Shabbos, and therefore maybe in that case, Rabbi Eliezer would permit it. That's why they asked them the question. So that is the end of this story. Now, the Gemara brought up a side point that Rabbi Eliezer never repeated a psak halacha. He never gave an answer to a question unless he heard it from his rabbi. Probably when his rabbi was alive, he didn't do it. Obviously, when his rabbi passed on, he took over the leadership. Tanur Rabbanim, and the Gemara explains, Ma'aseh Rabbi Eliezer sheshavas b'Galil ha'elyon. Rabbi Eliezer once came to the Upper Galilee for a visit. He was the scholar in residence. Ushe'eluhu, and they asked him shloishim halachas b'hilchas sukkah. They asked him 30 questions in the hilchas sukkah. Shtei mesrei, 12 of them, Amalahem shmati. I know the answer. Shmoina asr, but 18 of them, Amalahem loy shmati. I don't know the answer. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Omer Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says chiluf hadvarim, just the opposite. That shmoina asr lehem, he answered 18 of them shmati. He said, I know the answer. Shtei masrei, but 12 of them, Amalahem loy shmati. I don't know the answer. So he didn't know the answer, but they don't believe him that he doesn't know the answer. When he says he doesn't know the answer, he really knows the answer. So then why isn't he answering it? It's frustrating. Amr loy, so the Talmidim asked him, Kol dvarecha einem elam api hashmua. The only thing you know is what you heard from your rabbis. You don't say anything on your own. What are you, like a parakeet or something like that? I mean, what kind of teretz is that? So it had to do with a certain character trait that he had, and hanhaga, that he was ultimately giving a lot of respect for his rabbis. And he said like this, Amalahem, his katuni loima, you're going to force you want to force me to say dava shloi shamati mepi rabbaisai. You want me to say something on my own that I didn't hear from my rabbis? I have this custom that as long as my rabbi is alive, I do not say anything over that I did not hear from him. And you should know, I was always attending the shir, the lecture of my rabbi. And he says like this, all my days when I was a student, nobody came to me before me to the Beis Medrash to learn. In other words, I showed up on time at shir. I never took a nap during the shir, during the learning. So I missed the word. I never missed a word, my rabbi said. I did not sleep a permanent sleep, and then he did not have a temporary sleep. So I was the last one in the Beis Medrash. I did not leave anybody in the Beis Medrash. Then they went out. I was the last one. And therefore, what he's trying to say again is that when my rabbi spoke, I always took notes and I know exactly what they said. It's impossible. I was always awake and alert. And I never spoke idle conversation, which is like, levity or something not purposeful. And therefore, I can say for certain, I never say anything. If I never heard it from my Rebbe's mouth, I don't repeat it. So you're asking me a question that my Rebbe did not talk about it. So I can't give you the answer. I have my own opinion, but as long as my rabbi is alive, I'm not going to issue my opinion. And now, who was the rabbi of Rabbi Eliezer, right? So his rabbi was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakri. And now the Gemara tells you about the customs of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakri. Amr all of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. They say to you about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Yamav loy soch sichas chulim. From all his life, he never spoke idle conversation. It was always purposeful. He never went 8 feet or dalar amas below Torah without learning, without thinking about learning. Tefillin, and not wearing tefillin. Nobody came before Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in the shul. That's amazing. You would think he's the Gadol b'Yisrael, and yet he's the first one to come to the Beis Medrash. Nobody ever saw him take a nap in the shul, a permanent nap, or even a nap, a small nap. And he did not think about Torah when he was walking in a dirty place. Let's say he worked on the streets, and it was, they used to have the sewer in the streets. So even though you're allowed, when you're passing these places, not to say words of Torah. You're allowed to think about Torah. He was more machmir on himself, and this is a big thing because he learned Torah all day. That was all what he thought about. He would not even think about Torah when he passed through these alleyways that were dirty. And Rabbi Yochanan Zaki never left anybody in the shul and left. He was the last person to leave. Now, in his study habits, nobody ever saw him sit and read quietly. In other words, like you read a book, lahavdil, so you don't move your lips. Ella yoshev v'shayna. When he would learn, he would sit and move his lips, because when you move your lips and say the words of Torah, you remember it and it becomes part of you, right? Like you say, in our mouth. Then the pasuk said, and then when he ran a yeshiva, oh my goodness, nobody opened the door for his students. He himself would stand like a doorman, welcoming the students into the yeshiva. And Rabbi Yochanan Zaki never repeated something he didn't hear from his rabbis in his entire life, and therefore Rabbi Eliezer followed that custom. He didn't close the school except chutz. He never closed the yeshiva on the Beis Medrash chutz mi arvei psachim. He wanted the students to go home on Erev Pesach so they can rest up, to be up for the night of the Seder. Arvei Yom Kippurim, and Erev Yom Kippur he closed the school because he wanted people to go home and eat, because there's a mitzvah to eat Erev Yom Kippur. So those are the 2 off days in his Beis Medrash. Rabbi Eliezer, the student of his, would follow the custom of his rabbi, and Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai would never repeat anything that he didn't hear from his rav, from his rabbi. So Rabbi Eliezer did not repeat anything he did not hear from his rabbi. Now, who was Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai? Who was his rabbi? So now the Gemara tells you, Tanu Rabbanim, Shmoinim Talmidim Hoyerloi LiHillel Zakim. Hillel had 80 students. 30 of them, if the generation would have been worthy, they would have had the presence of Hashem rest upon them like Moshe Rabbeinu. They were on a very, very high madrega, not of nevuah, because we say nobody can be a navi like Moshe Rabbeinu, but you can see the presence of God. Like if you, I don't know how you can imagine this, but if we have a vision of how Moshe Rabbeinu looked, and that when you see him, you saw the presence of Hashem. 80 students of Hillel HaZaken had that power. Sometimes you go and see a great person, you automatically feel the presence of Hashem on them somehow. So that's how great his students were. 30 of them had the schus, that the merits that they could hold the sun up and they could suspend time, like Yeshua ben Nun. We learned Tanakh, Yeshua ben Nun told the sun to stop moving. In the story of Givon, you have to read up about it. But they also had that power. Esrim Beininim. So that's 80. But so now you talked about 30 and 30. That's 60. Esrim, there are 20 more Beininim that fit somewhere in between. They could have Moshe Rabbeinu's Shechina, and they're in between. They also had the power to make the sun stop. Okay, so that you have 80. Gadol Shebekulam, the greatest of all of his Talmidim, of Hillel's Talmids, Yonasan ben Uziel. Yonasan ben Uziel that wrote the Targum, Yonasan ben Uziel in the Chumash, and Katan Shebekulam, the smallest of all the students of Hillel, was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So now, what was the knowledge of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? Amru Olav Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai shlo hiniach mikra. He did not stop till he finished. In other words, any mikra, he learned, in other words, the entire Chumash and Tanakh, Mishnah and all the Mishnayos and Brises. Gemara, well, there was no Gemara in Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's time, but that refers to the logics and the understanding of the inferences of the words of the earlier Tanoim, like what the Gemara does. The Gemara is always inferring from the Mishnah this way or that way. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai understood that and understood the whole logic behind the words of the Tanoim. Halachos va'agodos, and the agodos refer to the Midrashim and Medrash. Diktutei Torah v'diktutei Seifrim. Whatever you can infer from extra words in the Torah, like an extra hey or an extra vav or something like that. v'diktuke seifrim, and the diktuke seifrim means the gezerus of the chachamim. They were understood human nature, and they made certain gezerus. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai understood all of those. Kal v'chamurim, and he understood kal v'chaimers, all the kal v'chaimers in the Torah. Ugzeir shavis, and all the gzeir shavis. To kufos, he knew the orbits of heaven. Okay, he knew the solar system. The gematrios, and he understood that there's a certain way to numerical values of the chumash that teach you halacha. Like we know that a nazir is a nazir for 30 days because we have a gematria. Kodesh year, they should be holy, the nazir. And therefore years, gematria 30. So many gematrias. Then he also knew sichas malachei asharis, the conversations of the malachim, the sichas shedim, and the conversations of demons, and the sichas de kolim, the conversation of palm trees. Now, it's not clear. Rashi says, I don't know what this is referring to. But others say that he understood all the medicinal properties of all the plants of the world. So he wasn't just knowledge of Torah. He had secular knowledge, as you see. He understood astronomy. Mishloish kaifsim mishloish olam. He understood the parables of the folk tales of the launderers and the folk tales of foxes. These are ways to explain the Torah through mishalim. And he knew how to, deliver it. Davagadol v'davagadol. He knew the biggest thing of the Torah and the smallest thing in the Torah. What is the davagadol? What is the biggest thing in the Torah? Maaseh Merkava. The chariot, the Kabbalah chariot, the story of the Merkava in Yecheskel, which is very high vision, with high vision that Yecheskel had. And Dove Cotton, the smallest thing, is Havayas Abaye Rava. He knew the back and forth and the questions of Abaye Rava. He understood them even before Abaye Rava came around. He understood them, but he never wrote them down. So when Abaye Rava came back later on, hundreds of years later, 100 and 200 years later, they brought it back. Lakayam Mash Nemar. God will give a tzaddik yesh, which is 310 worlds. You know, they're going to get in the future 310 worlds because they filled up their storage houses with knowledge. So, in other words, he knew it all, Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, and he's the smallest of Hillel Hazakins. If the smallest of the Hillel's Talmidim was this way, Gadol Shebekula and Alachas Kama V'Kama, the greatest, Yonis ben Uziel, he must have known, I don't know, how could you can't even fathom how much he knew. Amru Olav al Yonis ben Uziel, they say about Yonis ben Uziel, B'shash Yoshev V'Isik B'Torah, Kol Oif Shepareach Olav Miyad Nisraf. As soon as he would sit down and learn Torah, the angels of heaven would come down and start listening in, and therefore any bird that happened to be in that vicinity would immediately be burnt. So you get a little touch and taste of the Tanoim and who they were and how much they knew.
Wow.
And it's
amazing.
but they didn't just limit themselves to learning. They you see, he knew sciences.
Sciences.
Yeah.
You know, it's fun. Bernard, it's interesting. I keep on getting mixed up. Rabbi Eliezer is the one that was put in the cherem?
Yeah, I think so. Right. Yeah.
It's not Rabbi Elazar, it's Eliezer. So it's interesting that he was put in the cherem because of his ideas and his explanations on the Torah. So when he kept his mouth, I shouldn't say closed, but when he didn't respond and comment, he was doing okay.
Right. Very good.
After his Rebbe was nifter, he opened his mouth and he ended up in cherem.
Fascinating. Very good point. Very good point. That's a very good point. That's maybe, he knew what was coming. He died in cherem. The Gemara describes
this. Horrible. Yeah. And we never paskin according to Rabbi.
That's right. Right. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go through the Mishnah. This is the picture. A guy, his head is his head and body is in the sukkah, but his table is in his house. You see the picture on the screen. So according to Beis Shammai, this is not good because we are afraid that he may lean over onto the table and be eating in the house. So a person, most of his body was in the sukkah, but the table was in the house. Beis Shammai poislim. Beis Shammai holds that you didn't fulfill your obligation of eating in the sukkah. Beis Hillel makes it kosher. Now this machshir poislim doesn't fit in, but it also basically Beishamai says that a real sukkah has to hold your body and your table. Because if it doesn't hold your table, you may do a situation where you're going to put the table in the house and there's a gzeira that you're going to move into the house and be eating in the house. Even though you think you're in the sukkah, you're going to be eating in the house. And we actually paskin like Beis Shammai, because that we paskin that a real sukkah has to hold most of your body and a table. A real sukkah has to be 7 tvachim. It's one of the exceptions where you paskin like Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel said to Beis Shammai, we have a story. They went to visit Yochanan ben Chayronis on Sukkot. There's the elders of Beis Shammai, the great Talmidim of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. He actually was sitting, most of his body was in the sukkah, and his table was in the house. And Beis Shammai, the students of Beis Shammai, was sitting there and didn't say anything. So it's a proof that Beis Shammai doesn't hold of his opinion. Amr lehem Beis Shammai. So the other students, the younger students, said, "You got the story wrong. Misham Raya, that's your proof." Afheim Amr loy. The elders of Beis Shammai, the old Bach, the real students of Beis Shammai said to him, they said to Yochanan when they saw him like that, in Kana Yisanoig, if you were doing that, like Kiyamta mitzvah sukkah miyamecha, you never kept mitzvah sukkah in your entire life. Midrabanan, because midrabanan we have a gzeira that you're not yotzi sukkah eating in the sukkah if you put the table in the house. New part of the Mishnah: Nashim, women, vavodim, servants, slaves, ukatanim, people under bar mitzvah, peturim in a sukkah, a potter from a sukkah. But never, there's a mitzvah on the father to michanech his child to eat in a sukkah. Katan, a small kid, she'ein tzarich l'imoy, that doesn't need his mother anymore. So we're going to define that, but let's define it in age 5 or 6 years old, right? Chaya b'sukkah, the father has to bring him into the sukkah. Maisa, now the story is Violda Kalosoi Shel Shammai Zaken. The daughter-in-law of Shammai Zaken the old Shammai had a baby, a boy, presumably, and Upikas Samazeva. And so he didn't make a sukkah. He kept the baby in the house, but he opened up the roof of his house, and he put a schach on the sukkah before the cotton. So if you take a look at the picture here, this is the baby, nice baby. He's going to have his bris, or maybe he had his bris. And he just opened up the roof of his house and put schach over there so that the baby could be in the sukkah. Now, obviously, a baby doesn't need a sukkah. So why did he do that? It's like there's no chinuch over here. He doesn't know what's going on. So it possibly, they explain that the Beis Shammai also ate in that sukkah, and there's a din teishvu ke'ein taduru. And just like in your house, you don't eat separately and you don't live separately than your young children. So he felt that even a baby you should force him to be in the sukkah as well. How do I know a woman doesn't have to? The Gemara asks, how do I know a woman doesn't have to keep going to the sukkah? The Tarabanan Ezrach ze Ezrach ha Ezrach l'hoitzias nashim. It says kol ha Ezrach b'Yisrael yeshu b'sukkos. Every resident of the Jewish people should sit in a sukkah. If Ezrach would mean only the men, men and women. Ha Ezrach, the main man, the main Jew has to be sitting in the sukkah. Lahaitzi, it excludes as sonashim women. Koil, but it says koil. Every man, every person should eat in the sukkah. The rabbis saktanim, we include that young boys should be in the sukkah. This is the brisa. Now we explain it. Omamar, we learned above. Ha Ezrach. If it says ha Ezrach, lahaitzi es hanashim, that excludes women. That ha Ezrach excludes women. That women don't have to be in the sukkah. Where do you know it from? The word hey, lememra, that means that you want to say the word ezrach means bein noshim ben gavri mashim. If it would just say ezrach, means every frum person, whether it's a man or a female, would have to eat in a sukkah. And then ha, the hey, tells you no, only the men have to eat in the sukkah, not women. The hey, in other words, is an exclusion. It limits it. Votanya, but I learned the opposite. It says every person should, Kol Ezrach has to fast on Yom Kippur, right? They have to be Ha-Ezrach. So we darshan Ha-Ezrach. Now it says Ha-Ezrach, l'rabbis esanashim. That's an inclusion. Same word, same hey, and we're using it to include women. As shenashim Ha-Ezrachiyos, the frum women, shechayaves me'inu, they have to fast on Yom Kippur. Alma, so we see Ezrach Gavri Masher. The word Ezrach means just men. Ha-Ezrach means including women. So what is this hey? Is this hey an inclusionary word, or is this hey an exclusionary word? What does the word ezrach mean? Does ezrach mean both men and women, or it just means men? So the Gemara is asking this contradiction. So the Gemara is going to say that, just to explain it outside, that the word ezrach means men. Ezrach means from men. Ha is always inclusion, to include women. But by Sukkis, we sometimes use it to mean the opposite, but that's not really the source, because it's really a halacha l'Moshe Messinai. You'll see. Amar Rabba said, Hilkasaninu. By Sukkis, it's a halacha l'Moshe Messinai that women are potter from a sukkah. V'asmechinu Rabbanan Akroy. And the Rabbanan wanted you to remember that a woman does not have to eat in the sukkah even the first night. They could eat in the house. And they just gave you a pasuk to always remember a woman is not. And they said, okay, use the word ha'ezrach to teach you excluding women. So Gemara says, hey krav, hey hilchasa. Which one is the pasuk and which one is the halacha l'Moshe Messinai? Vesu, another question. Kra lamali. Why do I need a pasuk? Hilchasa lamali. Why do I need halacha l'Moshe Messinai that women are potter? Listen to this. Why do I need a pasuk to at all tell you a woman does not have to eat in a sukkah? Hasukah mitzvah says zman grama. Mitzvah says zman grama. Nashim peturas. Any mitzvah that a woman that it's time it's caused by time is potter. A woman is dependent on time. A woman is not obligated, and sukkah is no exception. And second word, and Yom Kippur, I don't need to tell me that a woman has to fast on Yom Kippur. Midrav Yehuda Marav Nafka. I know it from somewhere else. The Amar Yehuda Marav, Chen Torah Shmuel, Amakra. The pasuk says, Ish or Isha, a man or woman. The pasuk talks about averis, and the pasuk tells you that men or women are chayiv in any punishment in the Torah. Hishva hakosov. The pasuk makes it equal. Isha, a woman, leish to a man, to any punishment in the Torah. So if the Torah says you have to fast on Yom Kippur, if you don't fast on Yom Kippur, you get kares. So a woman is obligated. So I don't need anybody to teach me, and I don't need another pasuk to teach me that a woman has to fast on Yom Kippur. So the Gemara explains it like this: Omar Abaya, la'olam sukkos hilkasa. And Sukkot, there's a halacha l'Moshe Messinai, a Torah Shabbal Peh, that tells you that a woman is not chayiv in a sukkah. It's a mitzvah asay shazman garma. The answer is v'itzrach. I need the halacha l'Moshe Messinai. Salka daite chamina. I would have thought you have to bring your wife into the sukkah because the Torah says teishu came to duru. You live in a sukkah like you live in a house. And therefore, ma dira ish v'ishtay, just like in your own home, it's man and wife. Av sukkah ish v'ishtay. So sukkah, you have to force your wife to come eat in the sukkah. Kamash Malam, that's why the halacha l'Moshe Messinai says that you don't have to bring your wife into the sukkah. And remember that ha-ezrach is the word ha-ezrach. We'll use it, it's not really the meaning of the pasuk. They teach you a woman doesn't have to eat in a sukkah. Rava says again, I would have thought a woman has to eat in a sukkah from a different source. Itzrach, Sal Kedaita Chamina, I would have thought, Yolav Chamisha Asa Mechag HaMatzos. You learn Gzeir Shava from Chag HaMatzos. Mach Lahala Noshen Chayavis, Avkan Noshen Chayavis. I would have thought, just like on Pesach, the first night of Pesach, a woman has the obligation to eat matzah. So also I would have thought a woman has to eat in a sukkah on the first night of Sukkot. Kamash Malam, that's why there's a tradition from Halacha l'Moshe Messinai that a woman does not have to eat in a sukkah. So therefore, I don't really need a pasuk to tell me a woman doesn't eat in the sukkah. It's a halacha l'Moshe Messinai. So v'hashta the amrat sukkah hilkasa. Now that you tell me that halacha l'Moshe Messinai says that a woman does not have to eat in the sukkah, kra lamali. How do you learn the pasuk? Because the word ha'ezrach, we're learning the hey is always the bottom line of ha'ezrach means it's coming to include someone that I would have not known before. So we learn l'rabbi sisagerim. We include gerim, that if a person comes a convert, he's obligated in the mitzvahs of sukkah. Why would I think not? Salch dedaite chamino ha'ezrach b'Yisrael. The Torah says from Jews. Yisrael means from birth. Amar Rachmana v'lo es gerim, and not converts. I would think a converted goy does not have to sit in a sukkah. Kamash malan, the hay teaches you, the extra hay teaches you that a ger also is obligated in sukkah. Fine. Now, that ends the first. Now let's explain Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, I don't need a pasuk to tell me that a woman has to fast. The Gemara asks, Yom Kippurim, mid Rav Yehuda Amarav nafka. Didn't I learn it from Rav Yehuda Amarav? So that says that a woman and men are the same when it comes to, there's a pasuk that says women and men are the same when it comes to punishments. So I don't need an extra pasuk that a woman has to fast, because there's a punishment if you don't fast on Yom Kippur. So the Gemara says, I don't need the pasuk ella for a woman, ella l'toisefes inui. The extra, when you start the fast early, let's say we're supposed to start the fast, let's say a few minutes before sunset. That is minat Torah. The Torah says, start your fast on the Erev, on the 9th of Tishrei. So that part of the fast, I would have thought that a woman does not have to keep that part of the fast. She could start her fast later on. Because Salka Daitachimir thought, the Torah tells you that if someone would eat during that little period of the addition before sunset, then you don't get chorus and you don't have a lav. You just did an avera. So it's not really a punishment, so to speak. I would have thought loinis chayvu noshim klal. A woman does not obligated to make a toisefes in addition to the inoy, to add a little bit before sunset. Kamash Malon, the pasuk says that even a woman is obligated not only to fast on Yom Kippur, she's obligated like a man to start her Yom Kippur a little bit before sunset. Amamar, we learned before, call the rabbis is a katanim, that a cotton has to be brought into the sukkah. Now we learned in our Mishnah, a small kid is not obligated to eat in the sukkah. So the Gemara says, Loi kasha. It's not a question. Kan, but cotton shegi lechinuch. A cotton that reached chinuch has to be brought into the sukkah. In fact, you're not allowed to feed a cotton outside the sukkah. That's almost like feeding him an avera. You have to try to train him to come into the sukkah. Kan, but cotton shegi lechinuch. A cotton that didn't reach the age of chinuch, he's an infant. That's what our Mishnah says. You're potter from eating in a sukkah. So if the Gemara says, so cotton shegi lechinuch midrabanahu, a cotton that is obligated in the chinuch is only midrabanan. So why do you need a kol? The word kol is teaching you that a cotton has to be brought into the sukkah. That comes to imply that it's minat Torah. It's not minat Torah. So the answer is midrabanan. It's really a drabanan that a father has to train his child. Ukra asmachta ba'alma. The pasuk is to teach you other things. And it's just a way to remember that even a cotton has to be brought into sukkah. Sometimes the Chachamim would make like a funny drasha, but it's not a true drasha. The true drasha, the word kol, is used for other things. But the way to remember that, not to forget that you have to bring your cotton into the sukkah, just remember that pasuk, kol ezrach. Every Jew has to be brought into the sukkah. Then we learned cotton shein etzarach le'imoy. A cotton that doesn't need his mother, he's the obligation of chinuch. So we said that's about 5 years old. What is a case of a small child that's old enough that never needs his mother? How do you define that? Amr debei Rabbi said, Kol shenifna, if a child can go to the bathroom, the ein imoy mekanachtoi, and his mother doesn't have to come in to clean him and wipe him. So that's a child that's old enough that you have to train him to eat in the sukkah. And Rabbi Shimon says, Rabbi Shimon Malakish says, it's another way to see if a child is old enough. Kol shenei mishnah. So if a child can wake up in the middle of the night from a bad dream, the ein kaira ima, and he doesn't call for his mother, so then that's a child. That's a child that has to be trained. He's old enough to be trained for sukkahs. Frag the Gemara, what do you mean? Every child, even gedolim namikara, even like a 10, 12-year-old child, when he wakes up nervous, he starts screaming mom, for his mother. So if that's the case, if that's your shear, then no child needs to be brought into a sukkah. So the Gemara says, Ella, you have to say, Kol shenei be'inakari ima ima. He doesn't call for his mother twice. In other words, like a 3-year-old baby that wakes up, when he wakes up from a dream, so he's screaming for his mother will not stop shouting until his mother comes. A 7, 8-year-old, he might call his mother when he has a bad dream, but will not, he'll calm down, realize himself that his mother's not coming, and he'll quiet down himself. Such a child is a cotton that does not need his mother. And once you're a child that doesn't need your mother, you're chayav in chinuch. The father has to train him. Then we brought the one final point. Vyasa v'yolda kalasai. The story was that the child, the grandson of Shammai HaZaken, was born, and they made a makeshift sukkah so that baby could be in the sukkah. And we explained that maybe Shammai held that it's like Teshru Kain Taduru. You have to bring the whole family into the sukkah. So the Gemara says, Maaseh Listar. Isn't the Maaseh contradicting what you just said? You just said before, an infant is potter from a sukkah. And then you bring a story that tells you that you're supposed to make a sukkah for an infant. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah was missing a few words, and this is where you should read in the sukkah. A katan is potter from sukkah. An infant is potter from sukkah. For Shammai machmir, Shammai would be more strict. The older one time Shammai Hazaken had a grandson. He opened up the roof of his house and put schach on over the bed so that the baby could be in the sukkah. So if you want to be machmer, you could be machmer, but that's not it's not lachat halacha. So ends this interesting Gemara.
Very interesting. Very excellent. Excellent.
Okay, Be'ez Hashem, we continue tomorrow.
Shkoyach, bro.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.